welcome back to segment 2 of show 9 of HipMojo. So in the first segment, we talked about media companies being at the mercy of tech. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the struggles, so-called, between content and the aggregators or the distribution companies.
Well, Ash, Mojo is a content company. Aren't you guys pretty much at the mercy of tech just like any other media company?
Yeah, I think if you take a look at the video battleground, there's actually 4 different quadrants. You have the advertising, so basically the ad networks or the technology that addresses advertising, so it could be behavioral targeting and all that, analytics. You have technology, so the online video platforms, the content management systems, the CDNs. You have the content creators, and then you have the aggregators and the distribution companies. And that could basically be a search engine that just indexes videos, or it could be an aggregator that houses the videos. So I think if you take a look at the content quadrant where WatchMojo operates in, we basically do sometimes overlap. Our frenemies, so to call it, are in the distribution sphere. And then I think if you take a look at the advertising guys, they overlap a lot with the technology guys.
Well, let's go back to that frenemy thing, because you hear, at least in the tech area, a lot about co-opetition, It's kind of like this symbiotic competitive relationship. You guys have deals with companies like 5min.
5min, Grab, yeah, I mean, okay. So,
here you are relying on your competition for all intents and purposes.
Well, okay, this is an interesting thing that comes up in discussions we have. So if 5min, when 5min started, 5min actually marks the 1-year anniversary of their exit to AOL for $65 million. 5min is probably the only company since YouTube that has had a good outcome, exit-wise. Most of the exits in video have been basically investors throwing in the towel saying, we're going to put a bullet in the head of the startup. So 5min deserves a lot of credit for what they've done. When 5min started, it was a site that aggregated user-generated content around how-to videos. Their competitor, so to speak, mainly was a company like Howcast. Right. Howcast was also a website that produced videos, so it was professional content around user-generated content. So on day one, they're more close competitors. We have nothing really to do with them. Sure, we produce videos like Howcast, and we have some how-to videos, but we're covering everything from profile celebrities, right, bios of people and whatnot. Now, today, Howcast remains a producer of how-to videos, and that's all that they do. And 5min took off by partnering with professional content producers, sort of overlooking the how-to thing.
It's almost like they use the UGC as a jumping point to build a distribution network, and then they go after guys like you?
Well, no, what they want is they want our content because that's what advertisers want. Now, the argument that, well, why do you give content to 5min? Well, then why stop at 5min? Why would we house our videos on YouTube? Why would we house it on Yahoo Video? Why would we house it on Hulu? Right now, in terms of where video is, the content creators and the distribution companies are 2 sides of a coin. The difference is, in content, you don't have to be #1 to win. You could be Coke to somebody else's Pepsi and vice versa. Heck, you could be Jolt, and everybody sort of can get a piece of the pie. When it comes to distribution, it's a winner-takes-all. It's a zero-sum game. YouTube became #1 because it basically slaughtered Rever, Gooba, crushed Dailymotion and MetaCafe, and made the juice look like Titanic,
I wouldn't even call it slaughtering them. They all came after YouTube was already up and successful. They kind of
No, but Rever was out before, Gooba was up before. YouTube was only registered as a URL in 2005, and it exited 18 months later because it realized it needed a big parent like Google to fund its growth. But YouTube was actually somewhat profitable at the time it sold. But my point is that now the good thing about a content company is we could then over time flip a switch and say, well, we're not going to be feeding content like an arms dealer to YouTube or 5min or Hulu, and then we could align ourselves with one company and pull our content and do what we want. If you are, let's say, a media company, I'm just going to use company XYZ. I don't want to name any of our partners. If you're company XYZ, you come to WatchMojo, this is the critique I sometimes get. Yes, they might be interested in our content, and true, they might be able to get our content from 5min. But if company XYZ takes 5min's player and technology and our content is in there, that company XYZ is not really in control. They have to work through 5min's player. Whereas if they work with a WatchMojo, well, they're free to use whatever player that they want and have control of the advertising and the tech, right? So at the end of the day, anybody could be a competitor with everyone. It's still very early. There's competitors that become friends overnight and vice versa. But what I try to get to is that it's a very, very long marathon. So I wouldn't be too worried about why we partner with a given company and why we don't. It's really just about sort of building more traction, building the brand, building the catalog, and then over time, the roles will change. Companies that work together now will be enemies. Just on the record labels were basically on the verge of suing YouTube into like oblivion. And then what happened? Somebody at YouTube had the foresight to say, well, wait a second, instead of you guys suing us, why don't we basically build Vivo? And some genius basically told the lawyers to go back underneath the rock and brought out the biz dev guys, and they signed a great partnership, right? So these things change over time.
So it'd almost be like a newspaper looking at the newsstand as an antagonistic relationship just because the newsstand carries its competitors' publications.
Exactly, yeah. And at the end of the day, I don't think it makes sense for newspapers to do everything. For us, we have a team that is creating some of the best content out there. It doesn't make sense for us then to split that resource and say, well, we're also going to build a player technology and we're going to worry about the content.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. You know, even to a certain degree, by partnering with companies like Fiveman, you get to outsource a lot of your ad sales and you get to focus on your core business model.
Okay, now let me ask you something. Is there any merit anymore? Like, did you ever watch Arrested Development?
A little bit.
Okay, I actually did. It was one of the few shows I watched. It was pretty entertaining. Would you, if Arrested Development has always had this sort of like cultish following, and there's rumors that they're going to come back, there's also some truth to the fact that Fox might not be interested in bidding for it. Right. So Netflix apparently is coming up and saying we're interested in bidding it. And then you see someone like Glenn Beck leaving Fox, and now he has his own online presence, and he's doing a lot of these things which go straight to web, and TV's almost an afterthought. Does offline distribution ever matter to you?
I think, well, it still has a lot of potential. Like if you can get offline distribution, it gives you a lot of perceived credibility, and you'll get some instant cash injection. I don't think you need it anymore, and I think it won't even be a thought in probably 5 to 10 years in the way we are now. Because the fact of the matter is I can go out and push up my contents across a lot of not UGC channels, but self-serve platforms.
UGC channels.
Yeah, well, I can write a great novel, I can upload it to Kindle, I can sell it, and I don't even need the publishing houses anymore. So it's nice to have it. I don't think something like Arrested Development even needs it, especially they got so much brand recognition. If they went straight to Netflix, the cult following will follow, and any of them who are not using Netflix will start just because of that. And I think that's why Netflix is interested.
Well, I think that's the thing that you mentioned is the branding. I think if you have a strong brand, you probably don't need to rely on the offline, but I think if you don't have a brand and you want to build some kind of presence and distribution online only, it's not going to work because the Netflixes are not going to care about you. So that's the thing. And a few years ago, I thought that the celebrities who were doing these things online were doing it because it was sexy and in vogue. I think it's interesting to see who's going to keep doing it and who's going to go back to TV, which is where the sexy and the big ad dollars
I think it'll come down to who can actually market themselves effectively, because pretty much whether you're talking about a network or a publisher, they offer three main things. They offer the publishing of the content, the distribution of the content, and the marketing of the content. The way the technology has evolved, you definitely don't need people to publish and to distribute anymore. What you really need help with is the marketing. So someone like Glenn Beck, he has name recognition. He doesn't need that anymore. He can go off and if he's smart about it, can push his own thing. Obviously, if I'm more of an indie filmmaker, I'm not guaranteed any viral success by shooting a small web series.
The only thing I find interesting, and then we'll move to lightning round, is back in the day when you basically published a book and you charged $10 for that book, that was a reflection of the cost of manufacturing and producing that physical good.
Precisely.
That's it. Today, the marginal cost of production is almost zero. I think that's why you get like Seth Godin, who's like, just take my book for free because it's a marketing tool. So I think a lot of creative types have not figured that out. That
no, I don't
the
think
value.
they have.
Yeah, they probably haven't.
Even if you look at the price point, it came down to like if it was going to cost me, whether my book was 50 pages or 500 pages, there was still a certain minimum cost to like print it, bind it, and ship it, which means that I couldn't charge less than a certain amount on the shelf. Now, whatever that price was, no one was going to pay that much for a 50-page book. So books tended to be 300 pages and up. And now as ebooks start proliferating, you notice lots of micro content. 40, 50-page books, they're selling for 99 cents because those costs have been completely eroded.
Cool. We'll take a break and we'll be back for lightning round.